who's joined us today. I will remind everyone, you've probably seen the little thing flash up that we are recording this. So just for your awareness, we are recording this session so that we can have the benefit of Nancy and Diane's expertise and memorialize it and use it again and again. But I'm just thrilled that Nancy and Diane have volunteered to do the 101 course. I myself am new to the league. I'm almost a year old, I guess, in the league, and I had a lot of questions. So when Wendy suggested this, I jumped at the opportunity to have Diane and Nancy sort of go over what is, for Diane's gonna, I think, cover what is the league meant to her, how has she grown in the league, what has she done throughout the league, and they're gonna cover things like what's advocacy and how does it fit in the bigger picture. So maybe Diane, do you want to introduce yourself, and then Nancy? And for those, again, for those members who are outside of Falls Church, welcome. For those people on the line who aren't a league member, wherever you might be, we welcome you to join whichever league is closest to you. So Diane, over to you.
Okay, I'm Diane Habino. Currently, I'm co-president of the Montgomery County, Maryland League, and I've been co-president a couple of years now, along with Kathy McGuire. And I've always been interested in membership and have been on the membership committee. So being given this opportunity to explain a little bit about the league, perhaps to newer members and to those members who've been in the league, you can correct us and make your comments, but I think it'll be a good opportunity for everybody to hear from us about what the league is and what we do and how we do it. So, and just to let you know, I've been in the league for quite a while and in several different leagues, which I will explain again when I get my chance. So I'll turn it over to Nancy Tate.
Hi, I'm Nancy Tate. I was the executive director of the National League for 15 years. And during that time, of course, we saw all the different challenges that state leagues and local leagues had around the country. And so some of the things I'm going to talk about today are places where I know there is confusion or can be confusion, including some of the league terminology. I'm also on the Arlington League board. I have been the president of the Arlington League, but now I'm a happy board member and happy to do things like this. So I think we're going to, I think Allison is going to actually pull up my PowerPoint, and I will share with you what I think might be of interest to you. As we're learning here, we're seeing that a lot of you already know quite a bit about the league. But for those of you who don't, this is why we're calling it League 101. So I'm going to focus on the four main categories of the, I'm still on the first page, Allison. The four main categories of the league's mission: voter services, issue education, advocacy, and lobbying. And we're going to talk about all of these, but the main thing is that they don't all operate in the same way. We have some basic league values that we always respect, but there actually are different operational rules about how we do these things. Next, please. All right, so one thing is, as you probably all know, if you're a member of a local league, you're also a member of the National League and the State League. And all of the different levels of the league can do similar things, but they do them at different times, at different ways, but the categories are basically the same. All of these require volunteer participation of different kinds, and that means that they offer a chance for everyone to be involved. But that is most effective in terms of moving the league's mission when all of those activities can be effectively planned and coordinated. So we're going to come back to this next point in a few minutes, but depending on what type of activity you're involved in, you may, under league rules, be required to present both sides of an issue or only the league side. And you may or may not have to base what you're saying on a league position. But whichever approach you're taking at any given time, everything the league does is always nonpartisan. Next. Okay, so here's an interesting graphic that I came up with. These again are the 4 categories of the league's mission. And all levels of the league these are the same 4 categories. But any given league, any local league can choose what they want to do. You don't have to do all 4. And of course, you can change over time as well. So we can see the main categories: voter services, issue education, action focused on broad advocacy, and action when we're talking about direct lobbying. So I'm going to come back to these in more detail. The main thing to keep in mind is, why are you doing one or the other of these things? What is the purpose? So if you look at the left-hand column, in the top 2 boxes, the purpose is to inform voters to make their own decisions. So a lot of times you're informing your own members as well, but it's to inform voters. So I think everybody knows basically what voter services are. It's a wide range of activities: candidate forums, Vote 411, voter registration, lots of other election-related material. But also there might be issues that are not on the ballot, but seem to be important, and your members and or the public might like to learn more. So you can have educational programs on a variety of issues. And in these cases, just like voter service, where of course, to be nonpartisan, you show, and candidates from all parties. In issue education, when it's for the voters, you need to show both sides of the issues, the pros and the cons. So a few years ago, when we were doing this program, one issue that was on the horizon was whether Amazon was going to be coming to Northern Virginia. Well, at that point, that was such a new idea that we didn't know whether we liked it or not. So there could have been programs on, well, what's the pros of that? What's the cons? That sort of open-ended issue education. When you look at the 2 boxes below the red line, the whole point of them is to influence decision makers. So just to get into terminology here, the word advocacy is often used to mean all kinds of advocacy, with lobbying being a subset. But for the purposes of this chart, I'm breaking these into 2 because they operate somewhat differently. So for instance, there may be an issue such as, let's say, redistricting reform, where the league does have a position and it wants to educate its elected officials and the public at large about what that position is. In fact, it must have a position in order to advocate about that. So it's education again, but this is where you don't have to say, well, what would be the opposite of redistricting reform? You're focused on bringing along the people you want to influence to see the valid points that you have to make. When, though, there is a particular, but a lot of times that's a big issue. At some point in most legislative bodies, you have to decide on which specific piece of legislation you think, or the league thinks, I should say, could be most effective. And that's direct lobbying, where you're influencing the government on a specific bill. And again, you have to have that based on a league position. That cannot be the personal opinion of who's ever speaking. But in these 2 boxes, again, you don't have to present the other side of the argument. You are trying to influence the decision makers to the league's point of view. It's in these categories of advocacy that I think, did somebody mute themselves? I'm hearing a lot of background, sorry. It's in these 2 categories, and we'll get back to this later, where the whole concept of program planning comes up. And this is a term that often gets confusing, but this is where it's what is influencing. It's influencing the advocacy aspect. Next slide, please. So when a league wants to do advocacy, I mean, when would it do it? I mean, how are you going to decide that? So it's always the local league board that has to make the decision to address an issue of concern. And to do that, your point of view has to be based on a league position. It can be based on a whole position that's already beautifully written. You might already have one that the local league has already come up with, or it can be part of another position. It could be one that has been developed by the state league, the National League, or the NCA, the National Capital Area League. And when you're doing advocacy, of course, it's primarily directed to the level of government at which that league operates. So local leagues are supposed to advocate primarily at the local government level. In recent years, at least in Arlington, a lot of our passion has been directed at some of the statewide issues, a lot of the election reform issues, redistricting. So, and we have done that, but this is very important. A local league cannot lobby or communicate with their own state delegates on a state level issue if they have not already gotten the agreement of the state league. In other words, if the state league wants all of its advocacy effort focused on redistricting reform, a local league should not be deciding that they want to talk to their legislators about Medicaid reform, because it dilutes the message. The goals of any kind of advocacy is to be credible and to be effective. And this is not always completely obvious what's the best approach. Next. So what are some of the ways you can go about advocacy? Well, again, in the educational advocacy, where your whole point is to raise awareness, you can put on programs, you can have panels, speakers, you can write letters to the editor, you can show films and have discussion groups, you could have book clubs. There's a lot of different ways that you are educating people more broadly about the point of view that the league wants to get across. Of course, when you want to do lobbying, there's a lot of ways to do direct lobbying. You can meet with your delegate or your local city council member. You can write them a letter. You can send them an email. There's, again, a variety of different ways you can do it. But a lot of times it takes some careful thinking at the local league level to decide what strategy you want to use. Which approach do you want to use and when? Well, maybe you want to have some educational advocacy awareness raising programs, but then as the matter becomes more refined at the city council level, let's say, and one particular bill going forward seems right, then you could switch to direct lobbying. Do you want to join into partnerships with other groups? We all know that many of the issues that the leagues work on have other groups that are also concerned about that issue as well. So of course, the pro of that is it amplifies the voice if more people are making the same general points. However, you have to be careful about the downsides. And one of the downsides is that some groups that appear to be nonpartisan actually are not. And you have to really research some of these groups sometimes, because if it's understood that they are partisan, the league partnering with them undermines the league's credibility as a nonpartisan organization. But whatever position you've decided to advance, public statements can only be made by the league president, unless that president very specifically deputizes someone else to speak to the press on a particular occasion. Because the whole concept of speaking with one voice is sort of a critical league tactic, and it's in fact what all groups strive for when they're doing advocacy. Next. So what happens when there is no position? Well, and this is where program planning comes in. And as I said, I'm going to leave this to Diane, who I think will go into this in more detail. But the term program planning is, in my humble opinion, a misnomer. You're not really planning your program activities for the year. You are reviewing your positions to see if you have adequate positions to do advocacy, whether educational or direct. So sometimes an issue comes up and you have no position. Well, then you can't do anything until you create one. or sometimes you have a position, but it's out of date. And we have found that to be the case in Arlington. And at the state level, there have been several efforts. There are studies going on this year on issues that the state league felt had not been addressed. So it could be either one. Whatever is developed, though, the positions need to be fact-based and they need to have member agreement. And I have little quotation marks around those because these are key league terms. So fact-based, of course, is so that the arguments made in advocacy to decision makers are credible. There's good arguments behind them. There's some data behind them. And the other reason it's important to be fact-based is so that it's obvious and can be defended that we didn't adopt this position because it's mirroring one of the political parties, that it is a process of our members who decided themselves that this is what we believe. And member agreement is that process of, in a grassroots organization, such as the league, to really come together and say, this is generally what our local league agrees. It's not just 3 people on the board or on a committee or so forth. So there is a definite process for this. This is the same process that is followed at the national level, on the state level, and the local level, that when you have to create something new, you have to study the issue. You have to get some facts. You have to look into what the pros and cons of the problem is or are. Members have to discuss it. They have to have materials that they can use to have a discussion. They have to reach agreement by various mechanisms. And that agreement typically in legal language means by consensus. And that's sort of a broad term. It's meant to be broader than just voting, so that you get a feel for how the membership feels. And you don't come down to adopting a position based on one vote, let's say, because when the president goes forward to make public announcements about what the league believes, it's important that by and large, the whole league agrees with that. You don't want it to be a split decision. You want it to be reflective of the membership. And if it isn't, then you can't go forward. You change the position or, and amend it as needed so that it does reach member consensus. Often the only time, certainly this was true in the past, that you could get membership-wide discussion and agreement was at an annual meeting. With technology, there can be other ways of doing that because sometimes, of course, things move too fast to wait a whole year. But that's certainly a very legitimate way to do that. And at least up until this last year, of course, a lot of people did come to annual meetings. So I think with that, let's just go to the last slide here. So before I turn this over to Diane, I just want to emphasize that what I've been saying on these previous slides is about the league doing advocacy. Individual members can speak out on anything, but they can't say that they're speaking out on behalf of the league. Only the local league president can make official statements. Again, this is to emphasize the importance of speaking with one voice, which is critical. When there's too many voices, decision makers get confused. They can't bother to sort out who's saying what. You're much more likely to be ignored. So that emphasis of speaking with one voice is important. Certainly, when you get a Virginia State League or a National League action alert asking you, please go and say these certain things to either your US congressman or your state delegate, then you can do it. But then you are actually you're doing it again actually as an individual, because you don't have to be a league member to use league action alerts. So this is none of these rules are meant to limit your voice as an individual, but to promote the effectiveness of the league in as an effective advocacy organization. So I'm going to stop here just briefly to see if there are any major questions, but if not, then I'm going to pass this on to Diane. Okay, well, I guess I don't, seeing none. Diane, I guess it's
And I'll
up to
actually
you.
ask a question before you move on. When you're doing individual advocacy, is it a good idea to just sign your email or letter with your name and then the phrase member of League of Women Voters? Does that end up, presenting it as, somebody might think that's on behalf of, or is that actually a good idea so that your own legislature knows that League of Women Voters members are engaged and all of that?
I would say it probably depends on if you're doing it at your local level and you all know that you want your city council to do something, then you should probably say, yes, I'm a member. And I'm kind of repeating the same thing that my league has already said. If you decide on your own, I just think I'd like to write my state senator or delegate. I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't reflected on that for a couple of years. It probably doesn't hurt, but you need to, if you're not using their exact language, if you're not targeting the people that you've been told to target, you really got to be careful that you're not introducing anything new. It can only be if you're talking then, if you're going to involve the league at all, and you're writing to your delegate in Richmond, then it should be on one of the issues that the state league has said, yeah, let them know we really care about redistricting. If you're picking another issue like healthcare reform, you might as well, you probably should not use that connection because it's kind of irrelevant in that case. You don't want them to say, okay, well, the reason I didn't vote for redistricting was reform because I thought there were league members who really thought I should focus, on mental health care. So I would say it depends on how well tied together what you're saying is with the league, the level of the league that your level of government that you're trying to address.
Okay, thanks.
But Diane might have another thought on that.
Yeah, when I get an action alert as a member of the league and I write to my representatives, whether Senate, House, or state representatives, I always just sign my name. And I tell them I'm a longtime voter. I tell them I'm a longtime resident. And I usually do not mention the league as an individual. But I hear Nancy and I'm thinking, I suppose you can say as a longtime League of Women Voters member, I believe in this and work with that. But I think if you sign your name, Allison, and underneath put League of Women Voters, it gives the impression that you are speaking for the league.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
that's a slippery slope. And I probably would say not to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a clearer way of explaining it. In your own local league, if you're all writing and saying the same thing, then I think that's okay. But when you go up to the different levels, when you're writing Don Beyer or you're writing, State Senator Favola or whoever, and especially if you want to talk about some other issue, which is not one of their priorities, a league priority, then you actually should not do it because it muddies the water. So it's a little, these are the kind of things that are important to discuss within your own league. As an individual, of course, you can write any elected member about anything you want. But if it, and so I separate that up from responding to an action alert where the state league or the national league has told you, please contact, at your Don Beyer, let's say, and tell them to vote for HR 1, the John Lewis bill. Well, then you can choose whether you want to mention that you're a league member or not because you've been asked to do it. You don't have to do it because, like I say, anybody can respond to a league action alert. There's no sign in that says you have to be a league member. It's just good arguing points. But anything where you're using your own discretion and judgment about, I just think I'd like to express my point of view. As Diane says, you really should leave the league out of it.
Okay, then I'm Diane Habino, as I said. I was asked to tell you all a little bit of how I joined the league and how I am where I am today. I was working, no children, married, and wanted to be with a group of people who were interested in not only learning things, but doing things. I'm talking about civic engagement, being active in your community. So I first joined the League in Hartford, Connecticut. And then I moved to, and I worked on solid waste management of all things. They had a waste to energy plant in the 1970s. And it was interesting. I wanted to know where our waste was going. And so I learned a lot. And I think all of you probably joined the League as for one reason, to learn new things. And then we moved to Miami, Florida, totally different from New England. But again, I was interested in natural resources. There was saltwater intrusion. They also had to deal with their waste. And I became interested then and joined the committee and led that committee. But if you remember in the 1980s and again in the 2000s, Florida had this old-fashioned system of counting ballots that were actually like key punch cards with hanging chads. And the League was actually asked and paid to go to the Department of Elections. I went in Miami and we flipped through the cards to make sure there were no hanging chads. And it was kind of funny to read 15 years later in 2000, they were doing the same thing. But I'm hoping today Miami and Florida has updated their voting process. And then I moved to Montgomery County. And because I've lived overseas nearly 20 years, I got interested in the International Relations Committee that Montgomery County has, and also in membership. So as I said, the first part was to learn. The second part was I had something to share. And the third part now I was able to, I'm hoping, gather people together and coordinate and lead. And I think maybe some of you have joined the League for your own education to help out and coordinate, or maybe take some leadership role as well. And as I would like to repeat a little bit of what Nancy said, you all know that the League is very strong in voter services. And the National League has decided that that was going to be their main focus. It was a few conventions ago. And that involves everything that we all do during the elections. But the other part, this action and advocacy, has to do with, as Nancy said, our positions. So for example, most leagues can work at any of the 3 or 4 levels, depending on the area. So there are positions in the areas of health, of education, of transportation, natural resources, government, and elections. So as she said, if a league already has a position, or if the league has already studied something, in Montgomery County, we have studied affordable housing, for example. And if we've already reached the position, a consensus on a new position, then yes, we can advocate. But if we don't, and there is an interest in something new, like solar panels in our agricultural reserve, but we don't have no position on that, then in January, usually, when most leagues do their program planning, going over the positions they already currently have and looking to see where we might need new positions, that is where the ball starts rolling, where there is an interest, the matter is timely, you are at the correct level of government. If it's a county, Montgomery County issue, then we can study the issue of solar panels in the agricultural reserve and then try to do something about it. And as Nancy says, this process starts with the planning in January, and usually we all have annual meetings in May or June, April, May or June, and the membership says, yes, go ahead with this study, or no, we don't think it's right at the time, or no, we don't have the personnel, the staff to actually chair the committee. So then things get put on hold. but once you have these positions, as she said, I, as president or co-president, have testified before a city within Montgomery County or the county itself, and can speak based on the positions we have. Now, you might wonder, at the national level, there are also positions on healthcare, on energy, on election issues, and even more importantly, on immigration reform, so that a local league can use some of these state or national positions also if something comes up. And so this is how we use, while we're nonpartisan and while as we go through the studies to reach a position, we show both sides. Once we reach a position, that's the time where we take a stand. Because some people say, well, how can the league say they're nonpartisan and stand for both sides or not take sides? But yet again, you do take sides on issues. And this is the difference, right? And this is based on all of our research and study. We lead to these positions and we can support them or not. Let's see, what else was I going to say? I was also going to talk about and ask you all why you joined the league. And we would like, part of other things that we do is working to get new members, keep new members interested and occupied and renewing. And maybe for some leagues, although not all, we spend a lot of time fundraising because we are paying for things like our voters' guides, or we do in Montgomery maintain an office. So we have expenses that we also work on. So I guess to start out, I'd like to hear from some of you. Why did you join the league, and what makes you excited about staying in the league? Does anybody want to answer that question? I'd like to get a little bit of give and take here. I guess you can just raise your hand, or Allison, you can use the raise hand. Bob?
Hi, I'm Bob Crow. I was trying to figure out, sitting here, how long I've been a member of the League of Women Voters of Falls Church. I think it's 8 or 10 years, but anyway, and I've had various different positions. I was more involved when I was a new member. That I hear that's not unusual in most local leagues, is that the new members really get all the work, a lot of the work. But anyway, I joined because of being a nonpartisan organization, but because I had messed around with I'm sorry, the wrong word. Wasn't prepared for this. I spent a little time with the Democratic Committee in Alexandria, where I used to live, and found that they weren't so much interested in issues. And the issue at the time that was very important to me, and still is, and is important to the league, and still is a big part of what the league does in terms of advocacy, is money in politics. And I came to Falls Church, and I had decided to stay out of the Democratic and Republican committees and that kind of stuff because they didn't seem to be interested in the issues. They were interested in getting somebody elected, which is important, but obviously so I was interested in money in politics. So I'm in Falls Church, and I'm thinking I want to put on a forum about money in politics, Citizens United, the whole deal, and what can be done about it, constitutional amendment, et cetera, other things, campaign finance reform laws, and so on. And I was thinking, well, and I was new to Falls Church, and I looked around, and I somehow I found out that money in politics was a big issue for the League of Women Voters. So I called the local president at the time, Ellen Salisbury. And I said, and then I sent her, no, I sent her a letter. I think I sent her a printed out letter, and she wrote back and said, or called me or something and said, we'd love to do a forum on this, but our calendar is full, and so we could do it next year. We could fit it into the calendar for next year for programs or something. And then she says, and I thought, well, okay, that would give me a lot of time to plan for it. and then she says, and by the way, why don't you join the league? So here is the president of the league, giving me what I want, which is sponsor a forum on money and politics, and then inviting me to join. And I felt a little blackmailed into joining by that, but I was very happy to join, and I've enjoyed my time ever since. I did become sort of a programs coordinator at the time, and we did put on a lot of programs for a while. And I've also lobbied with the Lobby Corps for a while. I'm not doing that now, but I did. Sorry to take so long, but that's the reason I joined.
Well, that's good. I mean, I think that all of us, when we're talking about membership, need to remember the case that Bob had, that Ellen Salisbury actually asked him to join the league and suggested that he join the league. And I think that's really important, because people, I had a friend, an attorney in Phoenix, Arizona, and she was actually doing technical resource work for the league. And I said to her, why don't you join the league there? And she said, because they didn't ask me. They haven't asked me. And I think that that's something that we all forget sometimes. Does somebody else want to explain? Yes, Elizabeth, and then Patricia. Pat.
Okay, I spent my working life teaching American history at the college level. And, I basically kept talking about, democracy and role of the people. And then I also reminded them, can everybody see this?
Yes.
That women died so we could vote, right? And so one of the things that infuriates me is I sometimes hear conversations, oh, I'm too busy, or it doesn't matter, I'm not going to vote. And I'm sitting there trying about a volcano ready to go up. And so I think that we're lucky to live in a country in which our vote matters. And I wanted to be, I'm also part of the AAUW. I wanted to be part of an organization that continues to make that a reality and does not in any way jeopardize our right to vote. And we've been seeing, obviously, voter suppression in this current era, and that is very disturbing to me. And so, I, as an American, I feel it's an obligation to vote, but also to make sure that other people have the right to vote.
And the work continues. Thank you. Pat, how about you?
Well, I ditto to Elizabeth on some things. I belong to the Democratic Club, the Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt Democratic Club. But across the board, all this voter suppression stuff had really got to me. And I have known people who were part of the league, and I said, maybe there's a little more clout to stop this suppression. Maybe if I got connected with the League of Women Voters, we could do something about it. And that's why I'm checking out. I would very much like, one of my things is that being a grandmother and dealing with youth a lot, that they don't know their civics. And if there was a way to have programs, bipartisan programs, ways for kids to really understand how democracy needs to be protected, and understand what they're really voting for, how the system works, people aren't growing up knowing how the system works. Anyway,
Thank
I'd like to get
you.
involved a little bit in that. I've done a lot of teaching in my lifetime.
Hey, thank you very much. You said two things. One, there's clout, you think, when you join the league. And Nancy mentioned partnerships or alliances and working with either Common Cause, AAUW, any other organizations. We work with the NAACP in Montgomery County to unite together to push forward on anything that we have in common. And I think that the larger the groupings of people, the more influence you have. So I think that's one good thing. The other thing is, I know that the other day Allison was talking about students. We all of our leagues now have student members, mostly because they can be members without having to pay dues. It came down from our national league. And oftentimes we in Montgomery County try to help students with their required service learning, student service learning hours, and to make to offer opportunities for those students to help us, whether we're putting together our calendars actually that we sell, or when we're working before on voter registrations, that they would come out and help us. The other place that we do is that we have a kind of not too formal, but observer corps. And some of the students are happy to look at some of our county council meetings and report on them. So I'm thinking there are ways that students can actually work within our, let's say, civics without actually sitting down and having to learn the 3 branches of government and what the responsibilities are, by actually taking part in things. And I think it should be one of our areas of focus. I think how we can help younger people through any of our activities to learn more about how our government is run.
That's good.
Anybody else either want to tell us about why they joined the league, or if you had any questions about how the league runs? And as you heard, there are, okay, Barbara, there are smaller leagues and there are larger leagues, but we all are based on the same guidelines and guidance, from national to our state leagues to our local leagues. So whether you're here from Montgomery, DC or Maryland, we are still based on the same areas of focus, in that we have all these levels and we work the same way. Okay, Barbara.
Well, thank you. And thank you for organizing this today. It's been really informative. I wound up joining the league last year. I mean, I guess I got more involved in I live in Arlington, and I got more involved in trying to help the Arlington Democrats because I thought it was really important. But the thing that I feel that is most important really is like what you've been talking about, countering voter suppression and getting people registered to vote. And I think, doing it in a nonpartisan way, it's like voting, like you said, it's your civic duty, and students don't learn civics anymore. And, just the importance of voting and to protect our democracy. So that's, part of why, I mean, I'm wound up becoming a precinct captain for the Democrats here in Arlington. And I think the other 2 precinct captains and I joined at the same time. And we thought, well, maybe there was some way we could kind of combine forces, but, because of the way each operates, we have to stay separate. So I want to be involved in each, but, really, I so admire what the league does. And I haven't really been able to get all involved yet, but I really appreciate learning more about it. And for me, it's, issues are important, but it's really all about voting, because if we don't protect our vote, the issues won't be as important anymore. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Nancy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think people have raised a lot of good reasons why they've joined, and it's always kind of invigorating to hear people's why they came to the league. voter service, I'll just say this, in addition to voter, everything that people have said about protecting the vote, when you're really getting into protecting the vote, you often get into advocacy. So even though the word voter is in it, it doesn't mean, so the voter service, where you're providing a service to voters. What's on the ballot? What do the candidates have to say? What are their, let's see their bios and so forth, and vote 411. That's sort of straightforward information. What constitutional amendments are going to be on the Virginia ballot this year? That's a set of things in the top two, in the top box. But a lot of what certainly the National League and the State League, the Virginia State League this year, and the Arlington League, and probably Falls Church too, has been advocacy to push for specific changes to voter laws, to election laws. So the Virginia League had a big impact on this whole thing about the witness requirement. So as you may know, some laws got passed, but they didn't actually go into effect at the beginning of the fiscal year, and the coronavirus didn't overlap perfectly. And there were times that we needed to say, well, what if you're live by yourself? How are you going to go out and get a witness to witness your absentee ballot? All of those were actually legal strategies. In some of those cases, we were going to the courts. It wasn't just trying to change the legislature. So there can be quite a lot of advocacy related to voting issues, in addition to the more, well, just for lack of a better word, called traditional voter service, where you're providing information to voters. And certainly, I think all of us could agree, there's certainly this is a critically important time to be trying to have the system itself be as fair and inclusive as possible. But one of the things that's important about voter service, the information, and things like Vote 411, for instance, if you're not familiar with this online platform, you should be, is that if people don't know the rules, whatever the rules are, if they don't know them, they will end up disenfranchising themselves. If you don't know when your absentee ballot is due, if you don't know exactly what time the polling places are, and the polls close at different times in Virginia than Maryland, voters can show up and they've missed it. So both of these things, in its own way, even education is an empowerment tool. And we know that's certainly true in underrepresented communities, where they don't necessarily know, or people in some cases, of course, have actively tried to mislead them about when is election day, or what kind of ID do you need to bring. So these two things the topics are similar, but they're being approached differently. And that was sort of my point in explaining how you conduct yourself as a league when you're doing those. But they're all for that greater good of making sure that voters have the information they need, including the rules. If you don't know the rules, you're going to be in trouble, as well as trying to change the rules. And this has really been an issue in Virginia, maybe more than Maryland, changing the rules so that they're a lot more fair and inclusive. And that's been a big thrust, certainly, of this last 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And Sarah, I think you haven't spoken.
Yeah, I had a question, which is, as you look from your experience, as you look through sort of the cadence of what happens over a calendar year, could you lay out for us, maybe if you had limited amount of time, is there a certain time of the year where being involved is critical, or are there certain milestones throughout the year that members should be involved with or in?
Okay, I'll take a stab at it and Nancy
Okay.
can add. So the league year, I believe everywhere, begins on July 1st, okay, and ends on June 30th. Is that true in Virginia as well? Nancy?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so it, I guess, is similar to the academic year. But what I have found is we have mentioned this idea of, it's called program planning, but it's a time for all local leagues to sit down and take a look and see where they are in the area of issues that they want to push for, whether they have a position or not. And that occurs, I believe in Falls Church, you do it every 2 years, and other leagues, it's every year, usually in January of the year. That's important. If you are a newer member, want to hear some ideas, or you yourself have some ideas for areas that you would like to see either more focus or advocacy, because you already have an area like campaign finance that Bob brought up, or you would like to work on something new, ambulance fees, for example, in Montgomery County. Okay, so that's January. And there is a process that goes through through this spring. And then in May or June, there is the annual meeting where you're actually voting on these either new studies that come up or maybe new areas of focus. And sometimes leagues can talk about the plan for the next year in activities or forums that you're going to present to the public, okay? And then there's a slower period in the summer where people are regrouping. Some leagues have board retreats in June. And then you start up again actually in September. So this is kind of with some of these programs and plans you already have. That might be a calendar year for the league, but all of our leagues are also involved in the election calendar. And so you have to keep that in mind, that you have primaries or other ways before a general election. And I know especially in Virginia, you have continuous elections. So they are also, I think, every new member needs to know when the election process calendar is for that year or prior to the general election, because activities fall into place in preparation for the general election. So there's kind of two simultaneous calendars going at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining it. I would say if I think all of the leagues represented here, as far as I know, are active in a lot of areas. But for leagues who are having trouble knowing what to do, and I know there are leagues around the country like that, focusing on the elections is the core thing to do. And there's so much information, even about primaries, you know, because a lot of times the two parties handle it differently. People are always confused. I mean, it's not just students who don't understand how the system works, because in many respects, especially the election system, varies quite a bit by state. And if you ever live someplace else, you think you know what it is, and then you move to Virginia or Maryland and you thought you knew, but oh my gosh, that's not it. And so there can be lots of opportunities. And one thing about that whole voter service, which can just be putting out little cards that say when the primary dates are, when the absentee ballot dates are, when registration is, you know, which you can do and you can have printed out months before you actually are into the final stretch from, you know, late September into November. And that's getting the league's name out. I mean, this is one thing I will say from the National League perspective. We have a great reputation, and the league is well known around the country. However, a lot of people still don't know. I mean, you know, of course, there's younger generations coming along all the time. And if people in your community don't know that you exist, then they don't know that you exist. And in fact, they think you don't exist, even when you know you're busting your tail and having wonderful programs. So even things that are just simply educational, even though you want to build up to something else and you do want to get involved in advocacy, and as Diana said, that's somewhat on a different schedule, just using every opportunity to put your name out there as providing useful information or telling people where the website is, it can really be invaluable, because when you get down to it, you know, people will not listen to you if they don't know that you're there. So the other thing about the annual schedule is, because that's the fiscal year that starts on July 1st, the annual meeting is usually when you elect new members to the board. And so the board of each league needs to meet sometime, usually over the summer, and they start planning what the plan is. And, you know, and boards can change. I mean, somebody has a new idea, and that can be encouraged. So There's a lot of, I guess one of the things we all would want to say to anybody new is that most leagues have a lot of different opportunities for individual members to get involved, to be part of committees that exist, to want to be on the board even, or to start something new. So encouraging that flexibility, and then sometimes somebody has an idea and then, you work on it for a while and it doesn't take off as well as you hope. Oh, well, then you can do something else. It's not a life or death thing, and that being willing to adapt to your community and utilizing the skills of the people you have is what will make a successful league.
That's excellent. And I think Bob started out saying that he did not get this forum on public or financing of campaigns, but then he was asked to join the league and he did. So Bob, do you have one more question?
Yeah. I think this is for Nancy. It has to do with nonpartisanship of the league and primary elections. I'm embarrassed I don't know the answer to this question, but I know for general elections, candidate forums are very common for local leagues. What about for primaries where, for example, in the district I live in right now, there's going to be a Democratic primary in June.
I think maybe you're frozen. Are you frozen?
Yes.
If a Republican is going to be on the ballot, I'm sorry.
I
If
think
a Republican is going to be on the ballot, I think they're going to choose that person by some other method than a primary. But
Right.
Can we have a candidate forum for the Democratic primary election?
We didn't used to ever do that, but occasionally now leagues do that when it's very clear that you aren't picking one party over the other, but that there is only one party that's having a primary. I mean, sometimes there's no contested race on the other party. The incumbent is the person, and there isn't a caucus, a convention, or a primary, but there are a lot of people in the other party. So it is possible, but the league has to explain that really carefully, because you can get yourself into a little bit of a slippery slope. It has to be really explained, and most league people know this at the beginning when it's announced at the beginning. The only reason we're doing it like this is because there isn't one. Because if there are two, you've got to do both or you've got to do neither. And usually you end up doing neither because sometimes not every party wants you to do it. That's the one thing about candidate forums.
Right.
Candidates have to be willing to show up.
Wow. Thank you.
Quick, Pat? Yes.
Well, this is such an unusual year. I mean, to wait until January when there are like 48 states that are trying to do voter suppression right now, that's going to be taken care of before January. I'm concerned from an energy level that this is fine and this is what we usually do year in, year out. This is a different year in terms of all the suppression that they want to do.
Can I just, this is a point of confusion. The league can do lobbying, it can do advocacy all year long, anytime it wants, if it already has a position. The point in this January is you look at the things you have and you find out we don't have a position. And then you have to have a process for getting one. If you already have one, and we have got a lot around the country about election reform.
Good.
And so if you already know what it is, in fact, people were going down to the General Assembly, when it was in session in Virginia, advocating for the league's positions on, the witness requirement, the absentee. So you don't have to wait to do the advocacy, but you do have to wait if you don't have any basis. So that's what the program planning, as I say, what I would call position review, you look at, And of course, a lot of league people already know that they've got it and they're already doing it. So you don't need, for a new person, all you have to do is ask the president, do we have people working on X? And they'll tell you, yes, we do.
Now, do you have like a paper or something that gets sent to us? This is what the national is standing for, and this is what our position is right now. So that when you say it, you're
Well,
doing what the league.
in the Arlington League, in the Virginia League, the Virginia League has been very clear. And there, if you're not getting it already, you can sign up for the Virginia State League newsletter. You know, it comes, I forget whether it might be once a month, and it's very detailed about all the action they're taking on the redistricting commission, on election bill X, Y, and Z, you know, and then other topics. And we do that in Arlington, and we have a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks. So those things will keep you up to date on what's happening. At the national, there's also a thing called League Update that comes out every 2 weeks. All these things you just sign up online, and it will tell you a lot of things about what the national is doing. But at the national level, just to be clear, every league is working at its own level. So there's a lot of things, legislation at the federal level that are not that, the details of which are not that pertinent to the state and local. You know, they may be or they may not be. So some bills, like the John Lewis bill, there's a lot of specifics, but there were different specifics in what the Virginia League was pushing through in Virginia, like trying to come up with Virginia's own Bill of Rights isn't the right word, but protections, trying to reinstate into the state of Virginia what had been taken out of the Voting Rights Act by that Supreme Court case. Well, that's not exactly the same as the federal one. So if you want to know exactly where in the jurisdiction you're in, at least in Virginia and certainly in Arlington, you can learn that by these newsletters, probably on the website. I don't look to make sure how updated the website is all the time, but talking to our president, who is Joan Court, just you can email her, she's very responsive. You can just ask her.
Yeah,
So-
Thank you. Thank you.
It is useful to distinguish the newsletters that come out on a regular basis, and then separately, each league has a paper, electronic document that summarizes the position. So in Falls Church City, we do have, it's maybe 16, 18 pages. It is in the members section of our website. So once you're a member and you log in as a member, then you can pick it up and download it. And that does go through, okay, we know there's a section on arts, and here's our position on the arts. There's a section on affordable housing, and here's our position statements on affordable housing. There's
Right,
another
and that's
section-
the document that a local league would review in January, if it feels like it, to see, have we missed anything, or is one of our positions out of date? That's where January comes in, because that's the only way you can get it in front of the membership by the end of that, calendar year.
Thank
But every league has got that, and they should have them on their websites. But how they take a position and apply it to a specific piece of legislation at the county level or the state government level is what you can find out from the newsletters.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
And so in Montgomery, we have it in our member handbook, but I just use the National League's position because we were talking about immigration reform, and that's a national issue. So I went to a document at the national website under league management called Impact on Issues. And that document has all of the national issue positions, whether it's the area of government, natural resources, social resources, and I can't remember the fourth one, maybe even international, but it's called Impact on Issues. And every 2 years they update it. And it not only states the position, but it also gives the background of how they reach that position. So sometimes there is, you need to look further than your local or state league to find something to support or to not support. So that's the advantage. You may think this is confusing, your Arlington, Montgomery, Falls Church, but you also have the advantage of the work that's been done previously if it's a state level issue or even a national issue. And I think since I have the, the podium right now and I know we're coming to an end, I just wanted to tell people that in the past, the league has not done a good job of telling our own story, of reaching out, of being more conscious of the public and PR. And I think that now with social media, being on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, it is much easier to, if you are at some voter registration event, to have a picture taken and then put it out there so that people know what the league is doing. As Nancy was saying, yeah, we've got this great reputation, but people will come up to you and say, I remember when the League of Women Voters coordinated and moderated the presidential debates. But you know, that's been gone for 30 years almost.
Yeah.
So we need to keep it up. And so I'm just saying, remember, whatever you do, spread the word, use social media, and finally, don't forget to ask people to join, because I think that is really what we need to do. We all saw an uptick in membership the last 3-4 years, but now things are leveling out. Our work continues. We are still excited about it, but we need to bring in more newer members, maybe younger members, maybe more diverse members, and be inclusive about it.
Thank you.
Okay, so Allison, I don't know if there are any more questions. If not,
Yeah. We just wanted to mention Wendy was on the website of League of Women Voters Virginia and their action alert page. And on their action alert page, they actually say, do not sign with the phrase, member of League of Women Voters. So even for action alerts, pay attention to what Virginia says or the US says in terms of how you should identify yourself. So that's, important to
Good
find.
clarification.
thank you.
So, but thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, Diane and Nancy. It's been really fabulous to have you here with us today, explaining the structure of the league, explaining all the different ways that you've been involved, and then getting people engaged and talking about ways that they've been involved. So we really appreciate you for joining us on this program, and thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
You all.
Bye.